When Toni Bachman disappeared in April of 1997, there were still questions. Questions about her marriage, about the messages she had sent, about the possibility, however uncertain, that she might have chosen to leave her life behind. But within weeks, those questions began to change. Was it possible, investigators wondered, that Toni never really left at all? This is part 2 of her story.
Hi, I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Amy.
And you're listening to She Goes by Jane. At the end of this episode and every episode, we will be joined by a special guest who will read an original poem by Amy Baker about the women we're featuring. This week, we are joined by Astrid Rotenberry.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Amy.
Vanessa, last week we began talking about the disappearance of Toni Bachman.
Mm-hmm. You left us on a bit of a cliffhanger.
Do you have any thoughts so far?
So you had just finished telling us that Toni's middle stepson said that he heard her talking about possibly meeting someone at getting picked up at an airport.
Yes.
The following Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of the part leading up to this really made it sound like Norman knew more of what had happened to her husband, who she was in the process of divorcing, because he has this continually shifting story about what happened to her that weekend. She was. Mm-hmm. So, like, I'm still feeling like maybe the little boy was coached into saying that, or he did hear it, but something happened to Toni before she had a chance to make it to the airport. Also, we did establish that Toni's kind of like a bit of an open book.
Yeah.
And tells a lot about her. She's very open with her friends and family, but they were left in the dark about what happened that weekend. And I find that, I mean, I don't know Toni personally, but from what they're all saying, I feel like Toni would have let somebody know what was happening if something big was happening.
Vanessa, let me do some housekeeping here, because I do encourage our listeners to go back and listen to episode 1, because there's a lot of important context for what Toni was experiencing in her life before she goes missing in April of 1997. Toni, she's this bright, funny, friendly 38-year-old woman. She's facing a lot of heartaches just before she disappeared. So in 1996, she gave birth to her son, Michael, who passed away minutes after he was born. And her marriage to her husband, Norman, is falling apart. They were arguing often, and she'd even seen a lawyer about the potential of divorcing him. And then in early 1997, she also lost her job at Hamline University. She'd been given a choice: take another job at Hamline or get a severance package. Through all of these difficulties, Toni had turned to her online grief support group, which is called the Inner Circle, and she also turned to a man named David. And though he lived in West Virginia, the two had developed what can only be called an online relationship.
Well, and that's the thing, too. I guess I forgot all about David. She wouldn't be just, like, ghosting David. No, I guess ghosting wasn't a thing at the time, but it was a thing.
But
it wasn't named.
That, yes.
But, I mean, she wouldn't have just, like, ghosted this guy that she's actually feeling feelings for.
Yeah.
Over the weekend. If anything, I feel like if things were falling apart, she would be leaning into him more for support.
Right. Because she had someone who cared about her.
Right.
And though she had expressed her frustrations to both the Inner Circle and David, leaving Norman and her job wasn't exactly cut and dried. By late April, it felt like Toni may have made a decision. She was going to stay at Hamline, still move forward with the divorce, and continue her relationship with David. But on Friday, April 25th, she left work and she returned home. And that night, she sent 2 disturbing emails to David. The first was that Norman was threatening her and would be home to fight with her soon. Mm-hmm. The second was that he was home and he was looking at her screen as she wrote to David. That was her last known communication. Norman stood by his story that she had sequestered herself in their bedroom all weekend and that she had packed up and left while he was at the store with his sons. Some of what his sons, who were calling N, C, and F to protect some of their identity, seemed to corroborate what he had been saying. including that of C, who was 12 at the time. And he's the one who heard her talking on the phone with someone earlier the week, asking again for that person to pick her up at the airport on Sunday. Investigators were torn on whether or not it was intentional or if something more sinister happened to Toni. On May 20th, investigators decided to question Norman again. This time he added details to his statement, saying that when he got home from work on Friday night around 10:30 p.m., Toni had been at the computer and abruptly logged off. They began arguing again about the kids, about the state of their marriage, and he echoed what his son F had said, that Toni had told them that their marriage was an illusion. After she went into their bedroom and stayed there, but he did say that he slept in the same room with her on Saturday night, which is, of course, different from his earlier statement when he said that the last time he physically saw her was Friday night and that she had stayed in the room until Sunday. Again, she told him to take the kids to the store, and when he got back, she was gone. And it wasn't until Monday morning that he saw the note and called her at the office at Hamline, where he left a message for her. And the thing is, he did actually leave a message. Investigators had recovered a voicemail from him on Toni's work answering machine. On it, he said, "Hi, Toni, this is me, calling to see if you're at work. You haven't called me yet, and the note said so. Just seeing if you're at work."
I mean, anybody can do that. I don't know. Norman's got... The stories are changing too much for me to believe what he's
like all those details, right?
Yeah, it's just too much.
No. He said later she called him and said she didn't owe him an explanation, but he couldn't call her back. The caller ID had simply listed the number as anonymous. Again, though there were a lot of reasons to suspect Norman, which included the fight, the fact that he knew Toni was falling in love with David, the way he said he lost the note she left, but again, there's some reasons to believe him as well. The kids seemed to confirm that Toni had been in her room that weekend. And even if they hadn't seen her, they'd certainly heard her. And Norman did call her office at 8:21 a.m. Monday morning looking for her. But if Toni had left, where would she have even gone? One of the logical conclusions is that she changed her mind about the job after fighting with Norman and had left to go to West Virginia to meet David. But investigators had already spoken to him. He said that he had never traveled to Minnesota and that he and Toni had only planned to meet up once she actually divorced. David had offered to send them emails that Toni had sent to them. One she sent on April 19th read in part, "And I'm so fucking pissed off right now, I had to calm myself down by telling you. That asshole I am still, because I am so fucking nice, married to, is a fucking bastard. After we hung up, the phone rang within 30 seconds. Right away on caller ID, I knew it was the asshole himself. He was in a fighting mood and just went off on me like there's no tomorrow. The fucker even called me a whore cunt and used in the wrong context, which it was. Those are fighting words."
I think they'd always be fighting words. I really like her based on this message.
Yeah. I mean, you can really see her personality here, but also there's this reality. He is constantly on her, right? There's a lot going on between them. Now, Norman had already provided investigators with a lot of Toni's emails, but these included 2 email messages that were supposedly sent after Toni disappeared. Although they came from her account, they were signed from Norman. Now, one claimed that Toni had been having sex with other men and that she, quote, had a lot of skeletons in her closet. Norman sent another one, we're presuming it's Norman, a few days later. That one also depicted Toni in a negative light. It would make sense that Norman would be mad at the man his wife was falling in love with, but investigators focused in on one glaring omission. Norman had never asked if Toni was with David.
So your wife supposedly runs off. You're talking to the man that she was in love with, and you're not like, "Hey, where's my wife?"
Yeah, is she with you?
And that's the first thing most men would do.
Yeah.
I know she's with you. It would be, I think, an accusation at that point.
Yeah. Because he would be like, she's with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or he would be like, tell Toni to message me.
Yeah.
Right. Now, other things were not adding up either. Toni hadn't taken her own car when she left. She hadn't used her bank cards or touched her accounts. And that phone call C had overheard where Toni was asking someone to pick her up at the airport. Yeah, they couldn't find any record of a call coming in or going out at that time that would have corresponded with that call.
Okay.
Then investigators decided to get a search warrant to look at Norman and Toni's home. The Ramsey County Sheriff's Department and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Affairs started their search of the home on May 22nd, 1997, which is almost a full month after Toni went missing.
Aren't you surprised about that?
That it just takes this long.
That they wouldn't look there first, because you'd think that they would look, even if they don't think it's Norman, that they would just look to see any other notes or things she might have around.
Yeah. So first they do the quick walkthrough right after, right?
Okay.
On May 1st-ish when the coworker calls. And then her mom reports her missing on May 12th. So this is 10 days after that.
Yeah. So is this their third time visiting, or is it still the second time visiting?
This is the first time they do a search of the apartment. The second time they actually get a 911 call from the house, and it ends up being the boys were in a fight, and I'm not sure who called.
Okay.
But so police went to the house, and while they were there, Norman again said he hadn't heard from Toni.
Okay.
And so this is their third time back to the house officially.
Okay. But we're looking this time.
This is a full scale look inside the home. This house is pretty small, but they took their time. They passed through the living room where Toni's computer still sat in the corner. One of the primary areas that they wanted to look at was the basement. When Toni had been first reported missing, the reporting officer had done a walkthrough of the home, but didn't seem to have gone down in the basement. This is kind of a disjointed space. Part of it was used by C, Norman's middle son, as a bedroom. A different part was sectioned off into a root cellar. And this had two doors, one leading to the outside and one to the rest of the basement. The investigators focused in on this door situation. They did have some unusual features that they wanted to look at more closely. The interior door actually was two different doors. One was a heavy wood one, and one's a screen door. The heavier one had newer looking padlocks on it, and it was clear there were some recent alterations done to the trim and the door itself. So this stands out to them. The other door, the one leading out of the root cellar to the outdoors, had plastic covering it, and the only way to install the plastic sheeting was from the inside. Later, they'd ask C about these doors and the locks. He said that his father had actually put new locks on them after C and his younger brother F had run away from home a few months before. At the time of the search, though, this difference in the door had given them pause, and that's when they noticed the blood. Blood spatter was on the screen door itself, and on the doorknob to the heavier wood door, there was more. And that wasn't all. When investigators would describe in their report as two small globules of biological tissue were found on each of the doors. Investigators quietly gathered samples of that tissue.
Did they actually call it two small globules of biological tissue?
Yes, they do. So what they discover later...
What does that even mean? It's just skin?
What they discover later is that these two small globules consist of adipose fat, like your body fat.
Okay.
And one of them also had some muscle tissue attached to it.
It would have to be a pretty freaking deep cut to get to your body fat and muscle.
Yes.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. That's
disturbing.
Not at the top of your skin.
Ooh. Now, the more investigators look, the more blood spatter they find. There was some inside the chest freezer that was inside the root cellar and on the floor between the root cellar and the laundry room. There was even blood spatter on a cardboard box that had held their artificial Christmas tree and what looked like a swipe mark where someone had tried to wipe the blood off the box. Investigators next used luminol, spraying the laundry room and the floor inside the cellar, as well as the chest freezer. Now, luminol reacts with iron and it emits a glow when it interacts with various substances like blood. After they sprayed the rooms, they lit up. First the floor just in front of the chest freezer, then in the laundry room. And there in the laundry room, the luminol revealed 2 parallel lines. It was more than clear that something had happened in the basement. Moving through the house, investigators searched the bedroom Toni had hidden away in that weekend before she disappeared. There they found a box with letters from Toni to Norman, and they also found letters from Toni to David. They also found 2 printed emails in a dresser. They were the ones from David to Toni that he'd sent on April 28th, asking her if she was all right and could chat. The room was searched carefully, including the mattresses, and stuffed between the mattress and the bed frame was a sheet. This also had what appeared to be a blood stain on it. But as disturbing as all of this was, in the closet they found something every single one of Toni's friends knew she would never have left behind. A small urn holding the ashes of her son, Michael.
Yeah, this doesn't seem good.
Now, these finds are pretty shocking, but investigators were not ready to make any moves just yet. They seem to want even more evidence that something happened to Toni.
But it seems if the basement is lighting up with luminol, there's enough blood outside a body that could prove that something was wrong.
Right.
And I mean, the tissue, that should be way inside your body, being out of your body.
Yeah. So they bring in Norman's son, C, for questioning again. Likely because C had actually provided the most information about what happened that weekend and the days leading up to it. Again, C confirmed that he hadn't actually seen Toni that weekend, but he did see his father going in and out of the room over the course of the weekend. But the details he shared next were, it seems, new information for investigators. C shared that on the Wednesday after Toni disappeared, their father kept all 3 boys out of school and then loaded them up into Toni's station wagon. C recalled that there were several large coolers in the back that were covered up. They drove to Verndale, which is about 2.5 hours drive away. Norman simply told them that he was going to go see someone about money, but when they got there, Norman left his sons at his sister's farm in Verndale and drove away. Norman returned about 2 hours later and said he wanted some trees to plant back home. He returned shortly after, holding just 1 small tree. The coolers, C said, were still in the back on the drive home, and he heard what sounded like water sloshing around in them. Investigators tried to question Norman about this, but he was just going to go see his stepmother, but didn't find her. When they asked his stepmother, though, she said that she actually hadn't seen him in 3 years and that he knew where she lived, and it certainly wasn't Verndale.
So she wasn't covering up for him?
No. She was like, I haven't seen them.
Oh, yeah.
No. And when they asked Norman about the blood in the basement, he said that Toni had cut her finger down there once.
Did she cut her finger that bad? Like it was in the freezer, it was on the boxes, it was making 2 bloody streaks through the basement, the finger?
Mm-hmm.
I've never had that happen. Have you?
I mean, I've not sprayed my house with luminol, but I'm guessing it would not light up like that. No.
Not over a finger.
No.
Huh.
Yeah. So
And wait, are they just like, oh, okay.
It does seem like that's the tactic that they take. I mean, it's hard to know what's going on here because it does seem like they're biding their time.
Is this the part that made you angry?
Oh, everything about this makes me angry. Okay. They do search his sister's farm. They didn't find anything. And at first I was trying to give them some benefit of the doubt because DNA testing at the time did take a really long time to get results back. So I was like, maybe they're waiting for the DNA tests, right?
Right.
Now, these DNA tests, they've sent this blood and tissue samples to the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. It does take months to run, but those did come back in September, and they did reveal that the blood and tissue found in her home were a highly likely match to Toni.
Good. So now they're going to move forward?
Yeah, no arrests are made. Lieutenant Michael Rosner said of these test results, "But we still need a body to make this a good case."
Do they?
Yeah, no. Now, Vanessa, you and I just did an episode about Charlotte Lysdale, who went missing from Minnesota in 1985. And in that episode, we specifically talked about this very thing, how Minnesota would be handling a missing persons case without a body when there's potential for murder, right?
Right.
And it was in 1981, the state had decided to explicitly allow murder cases without a body because they wanted to thwart anyone who thought they could simply commit a murder, hide the body, and get away with it.
Right. But two things with that. It was 1981. We're talking 1997 now.
Yep.
So, like, progress should have gone in the right direction. And then two, Charlotte didn't even have a basement covered in blood as evidence.
No.
And they still were able to help her.
Or they tried.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they attempted to help her even without what was probably a ton of blood as evidence and tissue.
Right. We'll be back in a moment. The notion that they would need a body to make a good case, specifically in this case, is really preposterous. By April of 1998, though, Lieutenant Rosner was willing to say, "We think she was a victim of foul play. We haven't ruled out anybody as a suspect."
Have they ruled anyone in as a suspect?
They do say that they're keeping their eye on Norman.
Okay.
He's a potential, but they were not willing to say anything really definitive about anything to do with him.
Okay.
Now, while all this is happening, Norman and the boys are still living in the home where Toni was last seen. And in August of 1997, there's another 911 call that Norman's youngest son makes. When investigators arrive at the scene, they find Norman and his girlfriend, who he's been with for several months.
Like immediately found a girlfriend?
Yes. So they start dating the month after Toni disappears.
Whoa. Okay.
Now, when investigators arrive, they find Norman had been drinking and that his son, F, had taken his father's keys from him to keep him from driving to the nearby casino. At some point, Norman had poked his girlfriend in the chest and grabbed her by the throat.
Okay.
Which is,
he has a pattern.
He does. That, they had been called to the house before with Toni for choking.
Right.
Now, despite this assault, the couple continues to date. But by 1998, this girlfriend, too, began to have reservations about their relationship and wanted out. Over a period of about 3 months, she said she tried to break it off with Norman, but was unsuccessful. Finally, in September of 1998, she had enough and told Norman over the phone that their relationship was over. The next day, Norman asked her to come over. It was the second anniversary of his son Michael's death, and he wanted someone to be there with him during a private ceremony in his home. The woman agreed. When she arrived, Norman told her that she looked tense and convinced her to get on the bed for a back rub. She says he massaged her back for about half an hour, and then suddenly he grabs her by the head and holds a knife to her throat. "Now you're going to pay," he told her. And then he reaches under the bed, he grabs a duffel bag, and inside were flex ties, rope, and chains, all of which he used to tie her up to the bed.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's like very thought through.
Yes, he had a clear plan here.
Yeah.
Now, for the remainder of the night, he assaulted her and threatened to kill her and then himself, but she finally convinces him to let her go.
How did she do that?
She basically says to him, "I want to hug my kids one last time," but she promised she would come back.
He bought that?
He did.
Huh.
Yeah, he believed her. And instead, of course, she makes her way to the Regent's Hospital because she's wounded.
Yeah.
And the police are notified. And they're able to apprehend Norman at his home. And later, he did plead guilty and would be sentenced to 86 months in prison for the attack on his now ex-girlfriend.
And then now they're going to look at him for Toni?
Yeah, no, because...
Oh, wait, you keep saying no every time. I'm like, and now?
And now, no, because despite this pattern of violence, it didn't seem that investigators on Toni's case were any more willing to move forward with an arrest.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Now, after his arrest and conviction for the assault, Norman actually goes silent and refused to answer more inquiries about Toni's disappearance. But it's the boys that they would keep talking to. Throughout their childhood and into adulthood, investigators returned to them again and again. Each time, they kind of add details as though this information just keeps surfacing in their memories. In late 1997, this is prior to their father's arrest, C had said that while the boys were watching television, they heard Toni scream from inside the bedroom. In fact, he says that he and his brothers thought that it might be Dad.
Okay.
It's a dramatic scream. And when their father emerged from the room, they asked him what had happened, and he said that it had to do with Toni's boil. That he popped it or flicked it or something.
Jeez.
Yeah. Later, he would describe the house as smelling bitter.
That's weird.
And he said that as they drove to Ferndale to the farm, he said that the car smelled similar, which was bitter and awkward.
The kid said it smelled bitter and awkward?
Yeah, this is his way of trying to describe what he experienced, because I think at this time he would have still been 12 years old, right?
Why awkward?
Well, that's his way
smell.
Trying to verbalize what this was.
Yeah.
He said he hadn't shared this information with investigators previously because they hadn't asked. But then he goes on to say that he hadn't shared it because this information had actually made him uncomfortable.
So it was the awkward, was he meaning like a bad smell or?
Yeah, I mean, something that made him scared or uncomfortable. Now, in 2003, they did another round of interviews. F, who was the youngest, added that he had seen his father enter the bedroom with an X-Acto knife and that he had also heard muffled sounds like someone trying to talk under a pillow. He also said that Norman told him that Toni had called after she left, but when F had checked the caller ID, there was no record of a call. He asked his dad about it, but Norman just said that for some reason the caller ID hadn't picked up anything. It's clear that at the time the sons doubted what their dad was telling them because he went through the step of checking the caller ID.
But they're also really young, and this has to be a very scary situation for them. This woman is essentially their second mom.
Yeah. She's been with them since they were babies.
Yeah.
I mean, in the case of F, his entire life, right? N said that he did hear Toni in pain that weekend, but didn't specify when it was, and also didn't recall any strange smells in the house. He did remember helping his father load coolers in the back of the car and possibly a shovel. Now, C, the middle kid, doubled down on hearing Toni scream, but then he added that at some point when the door opened, he'd actually seen Toni laying on the bed on her stomach with her eyes closed. And to thwart your question, even with these additional statements, Vanessa, no, the investigators continued to decline to charge Norman with anything. In 2012, there actually had been a television news piece about Toni that had prompted some tips to come in, and a new search was done, this time of her former home, which included an excavation in the backyard and in the basement, and it doesn't seem like anything was found during this search. But this did prompt them to question the boys once again. At this point, all three were adults living their own lives, experiencing their own problems. C, the middle son, was the first to be interviewed. He again remembered seeing Toni on the bed, and this time he said it was unusual for Toni to have been in the room all weekend. And even when Norman and Toni were fighting, this isn't something she would have typically done, close herself in the room for the entire weekend. He also recalled that prior to going to the farm, his father was in the basement a lot. F, the youngest, was interviewed in this round as well. He said that he remembered his father being in the basement and cleaning it with bleach. But it's really what F says next that was the true bombshell. F said that as an adult, he'd worked for the same company as his dad, and that at some point he decided to confront him about Toni. He said that Norman admitted to killing Toni, but then added that no one would be able to prove it.
So he's feeling very overly confident in himself, but at the same time, investigators haven't given him a reason to not feel confident.
Yeah. This has gone on now for years. 15 years at this point?
This has to be terrifying for these boys. They're bringing this now into adulthood, unresolved, and now their dad's saying stuff like this.
Yeah. Now, this would have been, of course, a major development in the case. I was so enraged about all of this, walking around my house like, what the? But, so because F can provide statements about Norman's confession, but F actually went further. He said that he also remembered there being coolers and a shovel in the back of the car as they'd gone to that farm, right? Mm-hmm. But he'd also noticed a strange odor in the car. F said that at the time, he didn't know what it was, but that as an adult, he'd actually worked at a funeral home and could now pinpoint the smell. It was the smell of a human corpse.
Oof. Okay. I was thinking blood or something, but it's even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not like these boys are hiding anything either. They seem willing to talk.
Yes.
So
what is
happening with the investigation?
So they also talked to N, again, the oldest son. He says that he remembered loading the car with a cooler, some buckets, and a shovel. And he also recounted his dad going to go get trees, but coming back with only one small specimen. So,
Yeah.
Now, despite these new details, including F's statements about confronting Norman, the investigators, again, did not move forward with a case against Norman.
What do they need exactly? They need the body?
Yeah. That seems to have been what they were saying.
So you can get away with anything with these people. As long as there's no body.
So shocking that this is going on this long.
Yeah. It's have so much going on.
So hard to fathom. Years passing without any action. In that time, Toni's dad passes away and then her mother passes away, and both never are getting answers about what happened to their daughter. On April 7th, 2015, which is a full 18 years after Toni went missing, Norman was arrested and charged with her murder.
Finally.
In this initial arrest, Norman waived his Miranda rights and provided a statement. He said that he had nothing to do with her disappearance or with her murder. He also stated that there had never been any coolers in the back of the car on that long ago trip to the Verndale farm, and he didn't know how Toni's blood could have made it into the basement. He didn't even remember her calling that Monday to tell him that she'd gone.
Huh.
Yeah. And my favorite is that in my research here, they actually ask the prosecutors, so why now?
Right.
And they're like, well, we're not at liberty to reveal why now because we don't want to compromise the case. But looking through the information, I can't tell what was the kind of trigger to actually make this go forward.
Right. Did somebody at some point be like, hey, this is actually ridiculous?
You need to do something. Yeah. Now, something happens as they move closer to trial. Perhaps staring down the reality of what a conviction for these crimes would mean, Norman decided to take a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty, he would only be charged with first-degree manslaughter.
Huh.
So he took it.
Well, why not?
In October of 2015, he stood before the court and Toni's family and offered his own statements about what happened that weekend. As I always say, when this happens, we allow the perpetrator to shape the narrative, to provide their own version of events when the victim can't. Mm-hmm. Now, these details are hard to hear, but I think these details are also necessary to understand the level of violence that Toni experienced that weekend, 'from the man that she had been married to for 10 years. In Norman's words, he and Toni argued and they'd scuffled. He claimed that Toni was the aggressor, hitting him in the chest, grabbing at him because he failed to help her with her boil. He then strangled her, he claimed, to get her to stop. Afterward, Norman said that he stood there and looked at her with amazement after realizing she was, in fact, dead. Later, he said he dragged her to the basement, where days later he used a knife and handsaw to dismember and decapitate her. He then placed her body in black garbage bags that he later buried. Yeah. In December, Norman stood before Ramsey County District Judge Salvador Rosas to be sentenced. During and after this, family members had a chance to speak, and Jody, one of Toni's brothers, told the press, "I truly believe there's more to the story, and he's trying to make himself look better by saying she was the aggressor. He's a monster, but a good storyteller. He knows where she is." But it's also C, Norman's son, who's also able to make a statement. Again, C had been just 12 years old when Toni was killed. Her disappearance and death had changed his childhood. "I was just a young kid," he said to his father. "I know times were hard, but there's still no reason to do something like this." For his part, when Norman was asked if he had anything to say, he said, "It's been a hard time for me. Hiding for so many years, carrying this around with me, this secret."
It's not going to make me feel sad for him.
Like you murdered someone.
Yeah.
I guess committed manslaughter technically. And so you're wanting people to feel bad that you've had to keep it a secret this entire time?
Yeah, no.
Like, no, sir.
No.
Apparently the judge felt the same way, because when he finally spoke, he said that he would never have agreed to the plea deal offer for Norman.
Okay.
But he understood the decision of the prosecution and the family in making that choice in this case. He also made clear that he didn't believe that Norman was being entirely truthful in this case.
Well, yeah. Because, I mean, if you accidentally kill somebody, you don't, do what he did.
Exactly.
It's two different places to be.
This paints, again, as her brother Jody said, it paints Toni as this aggressor in this situation, right? "You are a terrible person," the judge said, "to butcher her body like you did, to avoid the consequences of what you did, depriving her family the decency of even burying her. It's shocking." He added, "You continue to minimize what you did. You had the chance to be truthful and forthcoming, and you deserve more than what I'm going to give you today." The judge sentenced Norman to 13 and a half years, which was an upward departure from the sentencing guidelines. This would be reduced to 10 years if he would help authorities in finding her body. So there are limitations, right? Each crime has a sentencing guideline for how much time you're supposed to be giving them for that specific crime.
Because he's clearly saying he wanted to give him more.
Yes. So he did an upward departure, meaning he did charge him with more years than would be typical for manslaughter, but it's still not as much as he wanted to give him.
So this judge is pretty angry about what's happening right now, too.
Though Norman had said that he buried Toni in a place that had been special to him as a child, he actually failed to pinpoint this exact location of Toni's body. So Toni remains missing. Norman was sent to prison, and he served less than 10 years of his sentence, even though he never helped authorities locate Toni. He has since been released from prison.
So he's just out? That's it? Living his life?
Yeah.
And she doesn't get one?
No. Now, Vanessa, I didn't really want to end here because I don't want what Norman did to Toni to be with how we end the episode. So I just want to share some of what Lori Schwab, one of Toni's friends at Hamline, had said about Toni for the Hamline Oracle. And I think you'll enjoy her thoughts on Toni. She was always laughing, smiling, and being really friendly. Everybody loved her. She was just one of those people that everybody liked. We used to laugh a lot because she'd drive this little yellow Yugo car. Toni was this large person and the car was very small, but she'd openly laugh about the fact. It was a rust bucket. You had to be careful where you put your foot, or it was literally going through to the ground. People teased her a lot for driving that car, but she said, "Doggone it, I love my Yugo." And so it just kind of became her trademark, this little yellow junky Yugo parked in the parking lot.
We are now going to listen to Amy's poem, When We Lived Briefly in GeoCities, read by Astrid Rothenberry. Astrid Rothenberry is a New York-based actress best known for her role as Catherine Kelly in Netflix's His and Hers. Other credits include The Four Seasons, Law & Order SVU, and the upcoming Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed on Apple TV+. Originally from Tennessee, she holds a BFA in theater performance and is passionate about making the arts accessible and encouraging young artists to pursue their dreams.
When We Lived Briefly in GeoCities. Toni Bachman, 38, missing since April 25th, 1997, from White Bear Township, Minnesota. We were all there, sitting in the glow of our computer screens, listening to the crackle and wail of connection, our phone lines busy, creating the divide between the before and the after. What was it like? My daughter asked me. I want to say it felt less lonely in the city, but that wasn't true. Even there, we were always alone in our separate rooms of pretending. In bed at night, I think about you, how close someone could feel, through words flashing across your screen, like a line, hurtling you into a future that was always just out of reach.
For more information about our show, please visit shegoesbyjanepodcast.com.
Bye, Vanessa.
Bye, Amy.